anyway, I really want to give a hearty welcome to my old boss, Linda Ligon.
Well, boss, come on. Okay, so I am not making this up. Seriously, my horoscope for today said, time to evaluate your presentation. It really did say, well, I didn't have time to evaluate my presentation. And, the problem is, Jane said, well, it's going to be just the Boulder Weavers Guild, and half of them don't know who you are. Well, I see there's so many people here that I have worked with and, just had wonderful relationships with for, 10, 15, 20, 25, maybe 30 years. And I'm just kind of overwhelmed. I think I could just throw all my papers in the air and go around and hug you all. that would be actually very rewarding. But barring that, I will give the presentation I had intended to give to the Boulder Guild, most of whom didn't know who I was. So, and I'm going to read it because otherwise I'll get confused. My other caveat is Marilyn's slides were so tidy. They were all lined up and sized correctly. And I just kind of threw mine on the scanner, and I know this will it'll drive Jane nuts, but she knows that, deal with it. I didn't want to cut up my old magazines, because I didn't want to do that. So I just kind of threw them on the scanner really quickly. But I cannot tell you how many times I have used weaving as a metaphor for life. Marilyn referred to it, I've written essays calling that metaphor, and everybody does it. It's been done throughout history, and it makes a lot of sense because you have your fixed warp, that would be your genes and your place of birth, and other things like that are sort of the imperatives in your life, the things that are fixed, can't do anything about them, you work with them. And then you have your wefts, whatever you decide to put in there, across, whatever you choose. You can change your colors, you can change your textures, you can change your whatever, and that's your weft. So tidy weaving is like life. But the fact is, when I got thinking about coming here today, I realized that it doesn't hold up very well. So this may not have made it into the program, but my title is Why Weaving is Not a Metaphor for My Life. My life has not been a bunch of threads, evenly spaced, held in fixed relationships, crossed at neat right angles, with other threads. It's just not like that. I look at the many threads in my life, many, and they're, represented all over this room. And what it looks like, honestly, is a gang of hyperactive spiders run amok, throwing out their threads, running here and there, hopping over each other, crossing, overlapping, tangling, going off in all kinds of tangents. That really, I don't know about you, but that really is what my life has been like, and I wouldn't change it at all. But let's think about that a minute. I'm not going to start at the beginning, that being the random sperm and the random egg. Though I will share a quote by Lewis Thomas that our daughter affixes to the bottom of all her emails and that I like a lot. It says, statistically, the probability of any one of us being here is so small that you'd think the mere fact of existing would keep us all in a constant dazzlement of surprise. We are alive against stupendous odds. You'd think we'd never stop dancing. Isn't that good? And I've tried to think back on the random events that led to the next events that led to my being here today, being recognized as some kind of icon in the weaving world. I can say right off, it wasn't intentional. If Thomas hadn't decided to quit his job at a particular time, leaving me to decide to take up classroom teaching, and thus my being thrust without experience into the role of a publications advisor, whereby I learned the nuts and bolts of putting together books and magazines. If Janet DeBoer had not graduated from occupational therapy school at a time when she couldn't get a job, therefore moving back to Loveland to live with her mom and converting an old chicken coop into a tiny weaving studio where she offered lessons on looms she had built from plans that appeared in the last Whole Earth catalog, which, if Stuart Brand hadn't published it just when he did, etc., and if I hadn't signed up for one of those classes to ward off being driven completely insane by rooms full of randy teenagers who did not want to learn how to write a decent composition, if I hadn't become pregnant, and that is where the random sperm and egg comes from. If that dear baby hadn't had neonatal problems, if I hadn't therefore resigned from teaching to stay at home with him, requiring me to devise some diversion for myself, at which point we finally have two threads crossing, though not at right angles, weaving and publishing. So, that's just kind of the beginning of a pattern. It's just the beginning. Now, Ann Bliss is not with us today, but if Ann had not joined the Northern Colorado Weavers Guild just about the time I was deciding to launch a little regional magazine, and if she hadn't decided to publish her terrific little book, Rocky Mountain Dye Plants, herself, and if I hadn't had a funky old typesetting machine that I offered to let her use at my house, and if things in her past life hadn't made her so encouraging and supportive, then I might not have had the courage to carry on with my own project. So let's take a break here and look at some pictures. And some of these are repeats. This, as Marilyn pointed out, is the first issue of Interweave. This was an event that Ann and I threw in the public park in Loveland. It was called Madame Defarge Day, and it was on July 14th, and we invited people. You recognize somebody down there in the... How do we get that bottom thing off? That brightness thing. Does anybody know? See, not only editor, but tech support. It's wonderful. Thank you, Anita. Recognize the person down in the lower left corner?
Louise Bradley?
It's Louise Bradley. Knitting in the park. And for those of you who know Northern Colorado, there's Lois Frank next to her, and I don't know who some of those people are, but we spun and we knitted and we wove and did various things, and the final outcome was that lovely piece of fiber art that you see in the middle. Because that's what we did back in 1975, And there's Ann. She wrote a column called Homebrew that was a natural dye column for Interweave and later for Handwoven for years and years and years. And it was a wonderful contribution. And this was the second issue, and that's the studio of a Boulder weaver. Can anyone guess? Peg Templeton. Some of you probably know Peg, some of you probably don't, but she was great. And here, another familiar face. Can anybody recognize? Chris Switzer in the middle there. Now, notice these are not high-tech photos. But that was before Joe Coca. And
Eric and Debbie.
Deborah Chandler, formerly Debbie Redding, and Eric when they had That's when you were at Green Tree. It was before you had the weaving shop in Boulder. Way before. So that's when Barry must have still had the weaving shop in Boulder. So you see, I mean, this was, I don't know what that's about. Oh, it's Anne again. She did a lot. And this, she guest edited this first issue that actually had color in it, which was kind of a milestone. And that was, you know, maybe in 1976, late 76. So, okay, let's get back to the what ifs. If I hadn't made a road trip to Fort Worth in 1976 to visit the Weavers Guild there, and if I hadn't paid a call on Colonel Art Ronan, during which I hadn't had to take a potty break, I wouldn't have seen Colonel Ronan's little spinner's newsletter sitting there in a basket by the John, and I wouldn't have had that aha moment thinking, all spinners should have a magazine. And if I hadn't posed the idea to Ann Bliss when I got back home, and if she hadn't said, sure, I'll edit it, well, then there wouldn't be a spin-off. Well, maybe there would, but it would have been a long time and it would have been pretty different. So, you know, these things, you never know where things will lead. And, yeah, you've seen that one, you know, high-end 1977 art. And there's Janet DeBoer, the woman who taught me to weave in her chicken coop and who went on, oddly, to become editor and publisher of Fiber Forum in Australia, of all places. So that was another crossing, you know, that Janet wasn't thinking publishing and I wasn't thinking spinning when we first got together and got to know each other. So, you know, things just happen.